Well, good morning and welcome to The VUU. We are here with some of our regulars and a special guest. We are without our illustrious leader, Meg Riley, who I believe has fled the country. I'm not, all I see are Facebook updates. I'm not entirely sure. But welcome and glad that you could join us this morning. I'm Joanna Fontaine Crawford. I'm here in Austin, Texas, and I'm going to get the regulars to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Patrice Curtis, coming to you from Washington, D.C. area.
And I'm Tom Shade. I'm retired in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it's a sunny day here for the first day in a while, though I have been out of the country and I don't really know. So, hello. Glad to be back. I missed a week.
That's right. All of these people fleeing the country. Rob, you want to come out from behind the chalice and introduce yourself?
Hey folks, greetings from beautiful Buffalo, New York. 2 turntables and a microphone.
Glad to hear that.
When he did come out at first, I thought maybe it was because he was mad because some of us had a fan, but you know.
So, regulars, what's going on in your part of the world? Or actually, no, I will start first because there has been all sorts of press about where I used to be in Houston. And it's been this is the first time for me to really know people on the inside of a story that has blown up and has really been just not at all the reality of what was going on. And what I'm talking about is in Houston, you may have seen some headlines about how the lesbian mayor was trying to get the sermons from all of these evangelical pastors, and this is the government trying to shut down or chill religion or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll one thing I have to say that has been one of the most rewarding things in watching this play out is that I have gotten most of my information about what was really going on from an evangelical, Jim Harrington. He is the head of Mission Houston, and he also is a friend of the mayor. And so he was able to pick up the phone and call and say what exactly is happening here. And so the information is coming out now that, okay, no, this was not about, if preachers were preaching anti-LGBT things. The pastors in question have sued the city because the city passed a equal rights ordinance. And there has been some question about the names that were put on the petition and if they were gotten in the right way. And so they had some pro bono lawyers who, sent out long pages of legal stuff the way they do and asking for all of their papers so they could find out what exactly had been told to the volunteers in terms of how you followed the rules to get the correct signatures. And so in a long stream of all the when lawyers go out and get something, they say, give me everything, including your grocery list. And so one of the things on there was sermons. And so, in my opinion, there was some pretty, and the mayor said it last night at a press conference. She said, it does seem like there was we made mistakes on our side in terms of making this overly broad, but there also seems to be some deliberate misunderstandings on the other side, to cherry pick this thing out. But anyway, it's been an interesting thing to watch. It has been discouraging seeing how fast people were willing to make assumptions, but as someone who's also watching things on the inside, being able to see so many ministers, including evangelicals, come out and say, wait, let's find out the facts of what's really going on. Do we really want to, to be this fear-based in what we do? So that's been kind of rewarding to see.
Well, as someone who preached for for, 13 years before I retired, I always thought anybody who wanted to read my sermon was more than welcome to it. I was glad to hear. I would be glad to hear that somebody took an interest.
Yeah, that was the part that caught my attention too. It was sermons, okay.
Yeah, you would think that they would be like, oh, good, where the heathens are going to have to read my message.
Right, I'm going to be able to disseminate my word, but
apparently not. Okay.
Right.
Wow. Well, it's pretty interesting. So it's basically election shenanigans.
I don't know how much is election or just
that time of year,
Yeah, that time of year. And I will say, here in Texas, it's just crazy time all around. We got some good news where the Supreme Court made it to where we are not losing practically all of the abortion clinics in Texas. However, give with one hand and take from the other. The Fifth Circuit, love that court. The Fifth Circuit came back and said that we had some good news last week.
Yeah, I heard that, yeah.
A judge said that the voter ID was clearly unfair and not supportable, but then the Fifth Circuit came back and said, oh, it's too close to the election. Go ahead and let's have all these restrictions. So it's an interesting state to live in. That's my news. What's yours?
Wow. Well, I had just very brief, I had a friend who posted on Facebook a photograph from an article about he and his partner in North Carolina who'd gone down to try to, 10 years ago, right, this was from 10 years ago, gone down to try to get a marriage certificate and to get married. And, just his joy to see to see what's going on in North Carolina and big parties going on down there, our churches, getting together and just really celebrating same-sex marriage. So that was, it's just really, I don't think if anybody had asked me if I would see what's going on now, there is no way.
Yeah.
There's no way I would have thought that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I love the pictures of, our colleagues, Rob and Tanner and Amanda, Anna Marie on Alderman, in their wedding ceremony. They posted that up on Facebook. And they, of course, have those two gorgeous little twins right now. So it's
exactly. Yeah, so I think...
happy.
Uh-huh. I think Robin was interviewed for some newspaper, It was something like, I think, lesbian minister or something, and there's a photo of her, with one of the babies. It was just oh boy, people must be, some folks must be really struggling right now.
Yeah.
What's going on there? But yeah. So in my my home state of California, boy, the drought is just, it's really something to see. And the New York Times did a fabulous image of the state and showing how or actually the whole nation, and showing how it's grown just over time. And the difficulty is that we if you talk about our first principle and worth and dignity of all folks, and then you look at competing demands on water, where you have farmers who are literally, beginning to lose their livelihoods, and you have people who aren't even on the main system, and so so their wells no longer work, so they've been basically reliant on personal wells, and now those wells are drying up, and they're having to actually ship in water. I mean, for me, it's just amazing. It feels to me like what I've seen in other countries, where you're literally, there's a big truck that's bringing in potable water. I don't, I wonder how much worse it's going to get, and how that's going to impact sort of food costs and everything across the nation. So. But it's really hard not to have people get into that, I need, and I'm sorry if you don't get. So it's a challenge for us to think realistically. Okay, how do we balance all these needs?
So, Tom, where were you last week?
Well, I was on a boat tour through the former East Germany, former German Democratic Republic, from.
That sounds painful.
Berlin to Prague. No, it's actually quite. I don't know. My impression was that it, was going to be like a boat tour by abandoned factories, but it's actually, they have grass and sunshine and all those things over there. It was quite beautiful.
Oh, you thought it was going to be. Oh, how interesting.
But no, and like there's cities like Dresden and Prague are just beautiful medieval cities with great stuff. So it was purely vacation. My wife I would say it was a long needed vacation, but of course not for me, but for my wife who works too hard. And then she comes back, and one of the first things she reads is the hospital down in Dallas, Texas again, down in Dallas, blaming the electronic health record for the screw up with the index patient, Eric Duncan, and I have that right. Anybody who has like multiple last names, I always confuse it. Multiple first names. But anyway, Eric Duncan, that it was the electronic health record, which of course is my wife's major project in life, is electronic health record, and so she was like, her hair was on fire for that for a while, but then it turns out that really it was just poor care given to a poor person of color who didn't have insurance is the real culprit here. And of course he had no Medicaid because he lives in Texas. Governor Perry, at the legislature there, kept everybody off the Medicaid expansion, which puts more pressure economically on hospitals because they no longer get the subsidies they don't get the subsidies for free care they used to do, and they don't get the insurance for Medicaid, so they're strapped and struggling. I have no idea whether that entered into it, but the case is pretty clear as you read over the article by the man's nephew that he was not treated as he should have been. And as a result now, 2 nurses are ill, and many more are probably going to get ill if you look closely at what's gone on with that. Now, nurses are close to me. My daughter's a nurse, and they're to me equivalents of firefighters in terms of my emotional concern for them. So I've been.
Whoop, you just got muted.
Somebody hates nurses out there. No, I've been struck by just these 2 young nurses who did their job as best they could, knowing they were in a dangerous situation without the kind of backup and support and equipment they needed, and now may pay with their lives. It's just.
I hope that they are getting the experimental drug.
Yeah. Well,
the
the record at Emory is very good. No one has gotten. People have been cured at Emory, and no one has gotten the disease by transmission within Emory. So their record is much better than Texas Presbyterian at this point. So.
And I've been hoping that the first nurse, I know she was originally in at the Dallas hospital.
Yeah.
And I don't know if she's still at Dallas or in Emory, but the second one was taken to Emory.
Yeah.
So I hope that works out all right for both of them. And it's I was listening to I don't know, maybe All Things Considered, I don't remember what it was, about the way Médecins Sans Frontières or Doctors Without Borders has been training healthcare workers right in the midst of all of it. And one of the things that really stood out to me as I was listening to Nurse Yang, I think she's the first nurse who came down ill, is that MSF seems to have the buddy system So they seem to have already figured it out, right? This is one of those classic things where we're trying to recreate the wheel.
Yeah.
Instead of, so they use a buddy system where somebody is watching, where the healthcare workers work together, and obviously now they're saying, oh yeah, we need a buddy system here.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Prayers for all involved.
Yeah.
My goodness. And I suspect, I know that the nurse in Spain, she lost her dog because of this, and so that's just, it's kind of another just sort of, heartbreak, Then that may happen. The first nurse had a dog, and so I'm, it's just hard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in some good news, I'm excited to get to our guest today, and selfishly so, because my church is in the midst of our stewardship time, and personally, my husband and I are doing some different things with our generosity, going out into some scary places, but it's feeling kind of good. So, Patrice, can you please introduce our special guest?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Hi, Mark.
Hi.
Hi. So, everybody, we have Mark Ewert with us here. He is let me get this right, the Congregational Stewardship Consultant for the UUA. So I don't know if he travels all around the country, but he certainly, I know he's been up and down the seaboard, helping churches figure out, the stewardship plans. He is the author of The Generosity Paths, which is a book published by Skinner House, and so, of course, you can get it at Beacon Press. We've got a little pin it. Bob's got the picture of it down there in the lower left-hand corner, if you can see it. It's, I don't know, maybe Generosity October. This September, October are often months when our UU churches and fellowships reach out and make a particular effort to talk about stewardship. On some Sundays it can be kind of a sort of a big celebration. Also's Church in Washington D.C., where Mark is a member, former chair, or former president. We are having ours next Sunday, so this upcoming Sunday. So Mark, tell us something about stewardship that you think is absolutely critical for us to know. As we know, our churches seem to have, you seem to have a kind of a challenge around generosity. We don't like to be told what to do, so I know the UUA has this tithing plan, but it does seem like it's kind of a constant, I don't know if struggle is quite the right word. I suspect that some of my colleagues who've been in the business, is that, what is it?
I said cheap is the word you're looking for.
Oh, cheap. Okay, there.
Cheap, like little peeps.
That's the retired minister.
Yeah.
Oh, believe me, I almost hid under the bed when I heard about the topic today.
No.
I don't even want to go talk about this anymore.
Mark's going to make it.
Mark's going to make it. Fabulous. Tell us, Mark. Tell us the good news.
Yep.
Well, let me start by talking a little bit about where the book came from.
Right.
So I've been working in the area of charitable giving for a long time. I was a professional fundraiser for a national organization for a long time, and really got impatient with a lot of the strategies used by fundraisers because they didn't seem to tap into people's natural generosity and inclination to give, especially when they're passionate about something. So I've spent quite a bit of time researching, reading, writing about generosity and what makes people kind of step into that place where they're willing to push themselves and figure out what that limit is, and interviewed a bunch of people as well along the way. A good number of interviews are part of the book, and I've also worked with about 30 UU congregations over the past 6 years on their stewardship. So one of the pieces that seemed to really help people to step into opening up their generosity in ways that they hadn't before is to be really conscious of of what they've received. I found even if I just ask simple questions about when they have been given something that was really meaningful for them in their life in the long run, that kind of sparks an opening for people even before we get to gratitude, which is what we often talk about in UU congregations. But even a consciousness of having received something from someone, I think is powerful.
Can you give us an example of one of those stories, Mark?
Well, many people who I've interviewed don't have the most optimal education around financial generosity in their home, in their families of origin. Doesn't mean that people aren't generous, that people's parents were not giving when they were children, but money is a kind of complex topic, and I found that it's not always easy to talk to kids about it, and so many people didn't really have no idea what their parents were giving, for instance. Their parents never talked to them about what they were giving, who they were giving to, how they made those decisions. So many people learned that later in life. They had someone who acted as a mentor, or they were in a situation where they kind of realized that they could use their financial resources in a different way than kind of the consumerist culture tells us we can use them and for what purposes. So if I can tell you in my life, but if each of you think about an instance where somebody really gave you something that was meaningful and powerful in your life, someone may have said a kind word. Someone may have given you some money at a time in your life when you really, really needed it, even if it wasn't a huge amount of money. There's a couple that I interviewed for the book who are both, the man is a minister and his wife, and they kind of work together in their congregation. And when he was in seminary as a much younger man, they had what they call an angel, which was a person who knew them, who had financial resources, and would occasionally send them a check. Not for a huge amount of money, but it made a big difference in their lives. And it really helped them to understand that kind of blessed and self-sustaining cycle of giving and receiving that opens up financial generosity. I'll just pause.
I think that's neat. So how do you bring, so it seems that there's one situation where you're sitting down and you're interviewing someone and you're speaking with them one-on-one, and we would love to be able to do that with all of our congregants, have that kind of conversation. And some churches try to do something like that. They have lay leadership that tries to sit down with a good chunk of everyone. How can you bring that sense of looking in the mirror, I guess, from, when you're talking to the congregation as a whole?
Mm-hmm. Good question.
Yeah.
Good question. In many UU congregations, I find that stewardship is kind of obscure. The people who know about it, and other people don't. So many of our people who arrive, whether they're what we call the unchurched, or folks who come from different denominations, or even folks who come from different UU congregations, there's not a very clear path or very clear guidance or instruction around stewardship. So the annual budget drive, I think, is a wonderful time every year when you can start to kind of level the playing field about what people know about how giving works in the congregation and how the congregation is fueled by people's giving. Testimonials is a great way, and many congregations do that, where people will, either in writing or from the pulpit on a Sunday, will speak about why they give, what's important about the congregation. Sometimes those are really effective, especially if they help people understand how carefully that person has considered their contributions to the congregation or their financial commitment, their pledge. Sometimes they're not as effective because people will just say, I love this congregation because of X, Y, and Z, and that's why I'm giving to the congregation.
So that doesn't. So what would be the example of a really great testimonial? Because I've heard testimonials, and I do think it's great when people share. You know, I would think it would be great when people would share. Well, this is why, but maybe that's maybe there's a better way.
It should include why, because why is very important. But if you're thinking about someone who's maybe sitting in a far back pew in the congregation, and they've never served on a committee, they've not been involved in an annual budget drive before, and they're seeking information. So what kinds of information are helpful to them? You know, first of all, a short personal story is always a really good thing, as you know, to kind of ground things in a real situation rather than talking more philosophically or theoretically. Talking about how I figure out that decision. So I'll tell you, I'm married, and Stephen and I have a really considered conversation. We talk about what we think will happen in our financial lives in the coming year. We talk about what our other challenges are in our financial life, and where our congregational giving fits into that. All Souls is really our spiritual home, and it's our core community. So it's very, very important to us, and we really push ourselves to the edge of what we can give to All Souls. And I say that to people, and that's instructive for people to hear. And then to actually ask people directly, you know, please really think about this. Really look at your finances and try to figure out what you can do, because it's important. I really consider financial stewardship, I call it a bridge to belonging. So when I'm really giving generously to my congregation, then I know that I'm contributing in a way that makes it my place, that makes that congregation really feel like home to me, rather than as a guest in somebody else's home.
You know, I have been, you know, I spent, you know, just so you know, Mark, I was 13 years in Worcester, Massachusetts, First Unitarian, and, you know, we went through every reiteration of different stewardship campaigns, and we worked really hard on it, but you know, and now that I'm away from it, and I look back and I go, I'm wondering, you know, and basically we stayed in the same place, you know, generally. There was no breakthrough in our giving, and as the, you know, as our wealthier members who were aged, you know, went to the church triumphant, you know, our financial problems stayed about the same. There seemed to be an uncanny ability to figure out, for individuals to figure out exactly how much they could give to keep us always 10% short of our budget, right? I mean, how they knew that, I don't know, but it just seemed to work out that way. But one of the things I always wondered about the testimonials, and I've given those testimonials, is that for the person, as you call it, back in the far back pew, how much that looks like insider behavior. You know, somebody gets up and says, wow, this church is like, as you said, my spiritual home and my core community, and I'm here 4 nights a week. And, you know, I spend a lot of time, and 50% of my friends are from here. And the person who's there is going, well, wait a second, I'm not anywhere as committed into this church. I'm not really, well, and if I do, all of a sudden I'm like talking about what seems like unreasonable amounts of money. I mean, you know, when you're looking at, when you're a, you know, a $300 a year pledger and somebody starts talking about 10 times that much, you're thinking, well, that's crazy talk. Right? And so I have wondered about whether those testimonials actually kind of separate insiders from outsiders in a way that perpetuates the problem. It doesn't bridge up. And because what we saw a lot was our insiders were stepping up, but our you know, just to use the spatial metaphor, the back half of the sanctuary continued to have this kind of step back approach. Have you seen that? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I definitely get what you're saying. Let me tell you a story that's actually included in the book.
Okay.
I'll hold up here.
All right. Great.
Okay. I interviewed a young woman, an Asian American, who's a Unitarian Universalist, and in the book I call her Amy Lee. She gave me a lot of very personal information about her life, so I don't use her real name, but she's a real person, and I tell real stories and have direct quotes from her in the book. And she was a person who, her parents were born and raised in China, marched in the Tiananmen Square protests, actually carrying Amy Lee in their arms, which seems a little risky to me, but certainly is a powerful image. And later emigrated to the United States. So she grew up with parents who had no religious background at all, and didn't understand that it would have any place in anyone's life. But they were very political and social justice oriented, as you might imagine. So she came to her congregation because of the social justice work that the congregation was doing. She actually came to volunteer and participate in social justice programs. She'd never been in the sanctuary. It was incidental to her that was connected to a building that happened to be a Unitarian Universalist congregation. But through doing that work, she got to know some of the members, and over time had been decided to come to the congregation and attend on a Sunday, and started to really enjoy it and connect in deeper ways. So she ended up on the social justice committee that was running this program, and as part of that, she started to think about her financial resources as more of an instrument that she could use to make a difference in the world. And her co-chair on that committee, she ended up as a co-chair. Her co-chair on that committee was an older woman who actually engaged her in a conversation about the use of money, and particularly around giving to the congregation as part of that. And that really helped her. Right when I was interviewing her, she was in this financial planning process. She and her partner were actually looking at all their finances and trying to figure out, she's a young adult, trying to figure out about where they should live and how they were going to manage their finances together. And so hearing testimonials, understanding that the kind of role that a congregation could hold in her life, which was new to her, and then having someone that she was interacting with help with some guidance around how to think about that, really made a difference to her in her understanding and how she stepped into stewardship.
That's something that I've heard before. You mentioned young adult. I can remember having a brief conversation with someone who had been a member of VUU Church for a long time, who was retired, and who basically was lamenting rather strongly, close to whinging, about the fact that they didn't feel that the younger adults were pulling their weight. And I wondered about the kind of generational differences that you may or may not have seen in that. It's not only, I think, about around the giving of resources, but I also think it's about the joining aspect, right? Sometimes I hear, right, we don't, millennials aren't joiners, and so how does that then kind of impact their relationship to a church? I mean, I know you don't have to become an official member to be a giver, but I wondered if you could unpack that in any way that might be illuminating.
So I'm obviously not a young adult, so I'm
like, I would never say
that. The young adult group keeps inviting me to do stuff. And
I was going to say self-definition.
Yeah. But let me go back to what you first started talking about, where often in congregations, leaders will talk about a particular group, a demographic group or an age group or an activity group that they feel like are not pulling their weight. It could be, the choir, or the religious education parents, or the young adults, or the new retirees. Could be kind of any of those groups. And I found quite a bit. So I'd like to talk about that for a second. I used to work as a nonprofit fundraiser, and in the nonprofit world, you basically have your donor group, your staff and your volunteers, and then you have your beneficiaries. And those three groups are often quite separate. They're treated separately, and sometimes they're actually intentionally kept separate. Whereas in a congregation, part of the reason why I love working in congregations is the donors, most of the volunteers, like most of the congregational life happens because of volunteers, and then in large part the beneficiaries are all the same group. So it creates this wonderful dynamic, and I think allows us as congregations to talk about money and its uses and its purpose and how it's held in our culture versus how we might regard it within congregations. But also, that lends itself especially to social comparison, right? So I naturally form my identity by comparing myself to other people. So for instance, I'm older than Patrice. I have a different racial background than Patrice. This helps me understand who I am. Social comparison can lead to judgment pretty quickly, right? So, and that happens in stewardship in congregations. So once I figure out who I am and how I'm aligned with my stewardship, and I feel like I'm doing the right thing vis-a-vis my, economic universe and what I'm giving to my congregation, then it's very natural to start thinking, well, I wonder what Bob is giving. It doesn't seem like Bob is giving what Bob might be giving. So that's something that there are great blessings in talking about stewardship in congregations, but there are also these challenges that we need to watch out for. So whether it's young adults or people who joined in the 90s or an activity group, we need to be mindful of the fact that first of all, they're not a homogeneous group.
There you go.
And second of all, we may not know much about them if we're not part of that group.
So I'm very interested in the idea of finding financial wholeness as an individual. We live in this consumer-based, society. I recently read this great quote by MLK where he said, it's kind of one of the heartbreaking things as a preacher that I have to admit that when you're born, your greatest value is as a consumer, as a buyer. So trying to find your own financial wholeness, as a part of who you are, what's the role of generosity in that?
Great question. I love that. Well, I think as VUUs, we do a whole bunch of things to try to make the world better. We recycle, we drive Priuses, and different. We eat in conscious ways. There are all kinds of ways that we may be trying to benefit the world. One of the things I write about in the book is the idea of adopting the seventh principle of interdependence and thinking about that around economic interdependence. So you all were talking a lot about Ebola at the top of the call, and there are lots of ways that we are now much more immediately conscious of how connected we are to West Africa and how that might affect us, is affecting us, and might affect us.
Mm-hmm.
Economically, we're also connected to West Africa. Just as I in Washington, D.C., in my part of the city, am very much connected to parts of the city where people are living below the poverty line. And there's a lot of them in Washington, D.C. And I think those are things that we can talk about and need to talk about in our congregation, because I think many people have an uneasy relationship with money generally. You know, we carry around baggage. We hear the voices of our parents or grandparents talking about money and its purpose and its uses. You know, my mother, you know, lived through rationing in the Second World War. Her parents lived through the Depression. And a lot of those things still echo into my life. I have concerns about money in the future. I'm a full-time consultant, so I never know what my income is going to be. And yet I do find ways to push the edge for myself around being financially generous in making a commitment to my congregation. So as Patrice said, our generosity or pledge Sunday is coming up at All Souls this coming Sunday. My husband and I are going to make a pledge that we think is financially generous and befitting to our belief in the mission and purpose of the congregation as well as our engagement. And yet I don't know what my income is going to be in the coming year. It's a faith statement for me.
I was going to say, it sounds like a real leap of faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Leap of faith,
well,
exactly.
I mean, that's up there for everybody. Just to talk about my own situation is, you know, we were very generous when both of us were working. I mean, you know, we were tithing basically, and we were out there, and we kind of did that first and never thought about that, and we really didn't ever really look at our retirement planning. I mean, we didn't plan our retirement very much. And now, you know, now I retired and Sue's still working, and suddenly I'm quite aware of the fact that the way the system works now is that you retire with this pile of money that you have accumulated in your 401ks and all that kind of stuff, and you have no idea whether that's anywhere close to enough, or how long you're going to live, or how long you're going to last, and you know how long the money's going to go, and all of a sudden it's like I felt like I've been thrown back into this fear of insecurity that I did not used to have, and that as I retire, suddenly it's like, oh my God, what if worst comes to worst and I live till 90? You know, I mean, right? You know, I have a
worst comes to worst, yeah.
Worst comes to worst, and I'm healthy. You know,
yeah.
You know,
and I actually know what's going on, and I know, you know what I end up. Yeah.
Right. So the insecurity is, you know, I've just been reintroduced to the insecurity that I hadn't felt for, you know, a long, long time, because we were doing well. And
right. So let me just thank you first of all for speaking from the heart. You know, people in every stage of life have financial challenges that they are facing, and some of them they share with other people in their age group, and some of them they don't. It depends. But so when we are talking about money, and particularly stewardship in our congregations, we need to be mindful of that. You know, I may be a significant pledger. Well, I will tell you, when I had a full-time salaried job before, I was earning quite a bit more, and my pledging level was quite different at that time. And it's changed now. And, you know, for lay leaders who are you know, running those drives, for the treasurer who looks at those figures, they may come to their own conclusions about what's actually going on in people's behavior. But really, we need to start with caring and compassion, because I think what you were just speaking about is a spiritual challenge for you. And we can, I think stewardship is, first of all, a pastoral concern. So, you know, if I were talking to you about your pledge today, I would first be concerned about your fear and your concern about your place in the world and your efficacy and your ability to feel comfortable. And, you know, before we get into, okay, how much are you going to be giving to the congregation?
So this, following on with what Tom says, someone, you know, who's, you know, I guess 2 years out of seminary, balancing, you know, pretty heavy seminary debt load, and having an interest not only in supporting churches, but also in part of my expression of that seventh principle, as you were talking about, is that I give, you know, what I consider small amounts to a number of other UU organizations, like, you know, UU, United Nations Office, the International Council of Unitarians and Universalists, UUSC, and I always wonder whether it would be better, whatever that means, to consolidate when one has a smaller pot of money, you know, or whether it's like, you know, just balancing those two things, you know, so that I feel like, you know, what I am giving is making some difference for any given one organization, right? Or whether it's helpful for me to be showing support to a whole bunch of different organizations.
Right. So I'm also a philanthropy coach, is another thing that I do for work. So I actually talk to people. How do you think about this? How do you figure out your priorities? How do you determine the amounts? How do you engage other family members or partners in these conversations so that you're kind of on the same page, whether you're running the same program or running separate programs with your charitable giving? But Patrice, I think that's an ideal conversation to have, to occasion in a congregation. How do we think about these things? You know, UUs not only are benefiting a bunch of, possibly benefiting a bunch of other Unitarian Universalist causes, but also, you know, environmental causes and
NPR
health causes. And
that's one that often comes
exactly.
up.
And I think about my congregational giving as fundamentally different from those. But more than anything, I think that's a conversation we can have with each other that can lead to real intelligence and richness. I'll tell you, when I talk to people about their charitable giving in general, almost everybody, like, I'm not sure if I've ever spoken to anyone who didn't have questions, who didn't have doubts, who weren't, you know, who didn't get too much mail or get phone calls during dinner time and they weren't quite sure what to do about that because they care and they don't want to hang up on people. I mean, this is a whole realm of things that most people don't get much guidance on.
I'm interested in what you said about how you look at your congregational giving as something as in another category than you're giving to a variety of other organizations, because you know, that's something, especially up in New England, that's one of the things you're always working with in pledging, is that people, especially people with some means, spread their charity or spread their giving out over a large number of organizations, and then when it comes time for the church, they go, well, you know, really, I'm giving a whole lot elsewhere, you know, and
I volunteer for this and that, and
yeah, you know, and so I'm just interested in how you frame that. You're thinking that became a separate or a distinct kind of, or something that works with a different set of categories.
Right. Well, thanks for the question. One thing I definitely recommend is that people do start off with some kind of plan where they've made some decisions in advance about what are their priorities for giving. Well, even before that, how much do they want to try to allocate to charitable giving, period? And then within that, what are their priorities and how are they going to give in amounts that reflect those priorities? And then go from there. Obviously, you do want some amount of flexible resource so that if Ebola pops up in the middle of the year and you want to make a gift to try to improve that situation, I would recommend that, but you need to build that into your planning. But so to get back to your question about how might one think about their giving to their congregation, I'll tell you, I don't have a television set, and so I rely on NPR quite a bit. And actually, we have a couple of All Souls members who are regulars on NPR, so I'm a fanboy as well. And yet, when I go along what I would call my thinking path around my giving to All Souls versus my giving to NPR, I'm a faithful giver to NPR. I really believe in it. I believe they need the funding. But does anybody at NPR really know me? They know me in my congregation. Am I making decisions about who they hire at NPR? Do I have any say in the budget in NPR? If I stopped listening to NPR and stopped giving money to NPR, would they notice in any other way except in their database? So, and as you can imagine on the other side, when I think of my own congregation, yes, I have a say in who is hired. I have a say in what's included in the budget. I have a say in a lot of programs of the congregation. I have to put myself in a position to use that voice, but I do have access to that kind of influence. And if I left All Souls, I would really, really, really miss it in a way that I wouldn't if I changed news sources. And I'd like to think that if I left All Souls, a whole bunch of people would really miss me in a way that I wouldn't be missed if I no longer was contributing to NPR. So it not only, and I believe in the NPR mission, but the NPR mission is pretty narrow compared to the mission of my congregation, which is really about transformation. So those are some of the ways I think about it.
As we come to the end of our program, Mark, I'm curious if you think that there is one thing that an individual should really kind of think about as they're deciding whether to take the same kind of leap of faith that you have.
So there is a tool called the Suggested Fair Share Giving Guide. The Suggested Fair Share Giving Guide. It was actually created originally by congregations in Texas, you'll be glad to hear, and has kind of spread around the country since then. It's available on the UUA website, uua.org, and it's meant as a tool for people to think about their giving, to really consider what's an appropriate level to give. And aside from using that tool, you might just want to talk to some people in your congregation. You don't have to reveal the details of your financial life, but talk to other people who you respect, who seem to know a lot about the congregation, and just ask them how they consider their giving, how they figure that out, what that process is, what they think about. And that might really help inform you about your own giving.
Do you think pledging should be as secret as it is in most UU churches?
I don't think pledging is a secret as much as kind of the background around pledging. I think it's sometimes as basic as we give financial commitments because in this denomination, we take those financial commitments to then build the budget responsibly, and then we come back to the congregation to ratify that budget, which is very different than other settings in people's lives, including in other denominations. So it's just, why do we do this pledging thing? What does that mean? Even getting as clear as that. Not assuming people are dumb, but just assuming that people from other settings in their life may not have that information.
Although I have been in a situation in the past where, folks have wanted to join the church but didn't have any financial means. They were currently unemployed. And I think that's part of where the kind of this secretiveness that, one of the reasons why that exists. And I think the other one is that it's just also American culture, right? We don't talk about how much we make. We don't talk about, we just don't, the whole money thing is private, But it would be challenging it seems to me that it would be challenging and would be really, we would have to tread so carefully if pledging amounts were made public. Given that we're already judging people, right, based on identity, let alone, actually knowing how much everybody is pledging, which is sad.
Well, I think it's cultural, and culturally, I'm hoping in UU congregations we can develop a culture where first of all, we have economically diverse congregations and work out systems and ways of talking about money that make it okay for you to be anywhere on that spectrum. I think people often orient towards people who are more hard-pressed and more constrained in their finances. But I also think if we shut down the whole conversation, then I'm not sure how welcoming we are of people who have great wealth either. So we're kind of shutting down the conversation. We miss people at both ends. And we all kind of pretend like we're in the middle. And it's a lot more complicated than that.
So any last thoughts from anyone, including our guest?
One thing I would like to say is the book does have activities in the back. There is a whole section for small groups to work through, a whole series of suggestions for meetings for small groups that relate to each chapter. So if people as covenant groups wanted to work through the book, I think there are tools for them to do that.
Tom is on the UUMA. Are you on the somehow connected? And what I was thinking as you were talking, Mark, is that, maybe you've already done this, is that UUMA is doing these webinars online. And this might be one of those opportunities for a great webinar.
I'd be delighted.
Tom, you're muted.
Thanks. That's a good idea, Patrice. My last word on this is that you should always remember that church will get you through a time of no money better than money will get you through a time of no church. So.
Oh, beautiful! There's our quote for.
That should be a T-shirt.
Someone needs to be sure and grab that. Mark, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Mark. Yes.
Show.
Thank you.
This has been great. I would love to talk to you even more because it's kind of a weird thing to be religious and have to deal with all the financial matters. I think that for a whole lot of us, it's like we want to see those two as being something completely separate. And yet we live in a world where, that's kind of the driving force of so much. So I love hearing what you have to say and about your own personal journey.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And as always, want to thank Bob for being behind the chalice and running the tech for us today. And Bob, you want to come out and give a wave goodbye? You have any thoughts on all of this?
It's heavy lifting, I know for sure. And as a future minister, it's something I hope to someday be comfortable with. So this was a very worthwhile conversation.
Good, good. Thank you all for joining us for The VUU, and we will see you next week. Tom, who is it that we have coming on next week?
Well, according to our chart, we have Mark Morrison Reed next week talking about his Selma book, though I'm also trying to get someone from one of our St. Louis colleagues to come on and perhaps share some news from Ferguson, Missouri, which I think will make a great, just tell us about the last weekend. I think it'd make a great complimentary guest with Mark Morrison Reed. But
sounds great.
Details have not yet been worked out.
Yes, you will not want to miss it. We will see you next week on The VUU.
Bye-bye.
Bye.